Mark was born by the top Viltrumite Omni-Man, but what if the person who shaped him wasn't Nolan, but instead the most ruthless Viltrumite of all time, Thrag? What would Mark become under the guidance of the Grand Regent? And how would this change the entire course of the story? For this scenario to work, we need to imagine that during Nolan's mission to weaken Earth, Thrag decided to take a more direct approach. Instead of trusting Omni-Man with such an important task, Thrag would personally oversee the conquest of Earth, arriving just as Mark's powers began to manifest. Seeing the potential in this young half-breed, Thrag would remove Nolan without hesitation, claiming Mark as his own protege. Unlike Nolan, who struggled with human emotions and attachments, Thrag would have no such weaknesses. He would immediately separate Mark from Debbie, and all human connections, viewing them as obstacles to Mark's Viltrumite development. Thrag would tell Mark the truth about Viltrumite superiority from day one. There would be no lies about being a hero or protecting the weak, only the harsh reality that might makes right, and that Earth exists solely to serve the Viltrumite Empire. Mark's training under Thrag would be absolutely brutal. Where Nolan showed some restraint and mercy, Thrag would push Mark to his absolute limits every single day. Mark would learn to suppress any human empathy. Viewing it as a weakness that dishonors his Viltrumite heritage, Thrag would constantly remind Mark that his human half makes him inferior and that only through ruthless discipline can he hope to prove himself worthy. The first major change would be Mark's relationship with his friends at his high school. Thrag would never allow Mark to attend human schools or form human friendships instead. Mark would spend his days training and studying Viltrumite history and conquest strategies. Amber would never meet Mark Grayson because that version of Mark simply wouldn't exist. When it comes to the Guardians of the Globe, Thrag wouldn't bother with Nolan's elaborate deception. He would simply order Mark to eliminate them as a test of loyalty. Mark, raised under Thrag's influence, wouldn't hesitate the way his father did. These heroes would die not in a brutal emotional breakdown, but in a cold, calculated execution carried out by a teenager who feels nothing but contempt for their weakness. Mark's first encounter with the teen team would go very differently. Instead of joining them as an ally, he would be sent to destroy them. Thrag would see Robot Rex, Adam Eve, and Duplicate as potential threats to Viltrumite dominance that need to be eliminated before they can grow stronger. Under Thrag's training, Mark would systematically hunt down each member, viewing it as target practice rather than fighting former friends. The relationship with Eve would be particularly tragic. In the original timeline, their connection was built on mutual respect, understanding, and genuine care. But in this version, Mark would see Eve's molecular manipulation powers as useful for the Empire. He might spare her life, not out of love, but because Thrag recognizes her potential value as a tool for conquest. Eve would become a prisoner, forced to use her abilities to terraform planets for Viltrumite colonization. Cecil Stedman and the Global Defense Agency would face an entirely different threat. They wouldn't be dealing with Rouge Viltrumites or alien invasions. They would be fighting a war against Earth's own supposed protector. Mark, under Thrag's guidance, would systematically dismantle Earth's defenses, starting with military installations and government facilities. The GDA would find themselves completely outmatched against a Viltrumite who knows all their secrets and weaknesses. Battle Beast would still eventually come to Earth, but instead of finding a worthy opponent in Invincible, he would encounter something far more dangerous. A Mark trained by Thrag wouldn't be interested in honorable combat. He would use every dirty trick and ruthless tactic to win. Battle Beast, expecting a challenging fight, would instead face an opponent who fights like Thrag himself, brutal, efficient, and without mercy. The fight would end with Battle Beast's death and Mark claiming his mace as a trophy. The Sequid invasion would play out completely differently. Instead of fighting to protect humanity, Mark would see this as an opportunity to test new weapons and tactics against a hive-mind enemy. Thrag would be impressed by the Sequid's efficiency and might even consider using them as a model for controlling human populations. Mark wouldn't save anyone. He would study the invasion to better understand how to implement similar control systems. When Angstrom Levy begins his interdimensional experiments, he would discover that this version of Mark is far more dangerous than any he's encountered. Levy's attempts to gather alternate Marks to fight Invincible would backfire horribly, because this Mark wouldn't just defeat his alternate selves, he would interrogate them for information about weaknesses in other dimensions before executing them. Levy would realize too late that he's created a monster who now has knowledge of infinite realities to conquer. The Viltrumite War would have a completely different dynamic. Instead of Mark eventually turning against the Empire and helping to defeat it, He would be Thrag's most trusted lieutenant. When Nolan finally arrives on Earth to check on his son's progress, he would find that his mission has been completed beyond his wildest expectations, but also that he has lost his son forever. The Mark he knew would be gone and replaced by something that makes even veteran Viltrumites uncomfortable. Thrag's influence would extend far beyond combat training. He would teach Mark the art of psychological warfare, how to break enemies without ever throwing a punch. Mark would learn to manipulate humans by using their emotions and attachments against them. He would become skilled at identifying what people care about most and then threatening or destroying those things to ensure compliance. The college storyline would never happen, because Mark would never need human education. Instead, he would receive advanced training in conquest strategy, interplanetary logistics, and species management. Thrag would prepare Mark not just to be a warrior, but a ruler, someone capable of managing entire solar systems under Viltrumite control. Mark's relationship with his mother, Debbie, would be completely severed. Thrag would see her as a contaminating influence that must be removed from Mark's life. At best, she would be kept as a hostage to ensure Mark's continued loyalty. At worst, she would be eliminated early on to prevent any emotional attachments from forming. Mark would be taught to view his human family as strangers, unworthy of consideration. The eventual confrontations with other heroes, like the Immortal or Alan the Alien, would reveal just how different this Mark has become. When Alan arrives to warn Earth about the Viltrumite threat, he would instead find that Earth has already fallen, and that its most powerful defender has become the very thing he came to warn them about. Alan would face the horrifying realization that the coalition of planets now faces an enemy with intimate knowledge of both human weaknesses and Viltrumite strengths. As Mark grows stronger under Thrag's tutelage, he would eventually surpass even his mentor in raw power. But unlike the original timeline, where Mark's strength came from his desire to protect others, this Mark's power would come from his complete embrace of Viltrumite supremacy. He would become the perfect weapon, emotionless, efficient, and absolutely loyal to the Empire's goals. The question is whether Mark would ever rebel against Thrag's influence. The answer is probably not. Thrag, unlike Nolan, would never show weakness or doubt. He would never have emotional breakdowns or conflicted feelings about his mission. Mark would never see cracks in Thrag's philosophy, because there wouldn't be any. Thrag truly believes in Viltrumite superiority and would never give Mark a reason to question it. This version of Mark would become the ultimate Viltrumite warrior, combining the best aspects of both races while embracing none of their weaknesses. He would be stronger than Nolan because he never held back, more cunning than Conquest because he was raised by the Grand Regent himself, and more dangerous than any Viltrumite before him because he understands both human psychology and Viltrumite tactics. The Earth in this timeline would become a perfect example of Viltrumite efficiency. Humans would be sorted into useful categories: workers, soldiers, breeders, and those designated for elimination. Cities would be restructured for maximum productivity, with no consideration for human comfort or happiness. The planet would serve as Thrag's model for how all conquered worlds should be managed. If you have ever wondered what would happen if Mark was raised on Viltrum, or what would happen if he got his powers as a child, you can watch those videos here. And remember to subscribe.